if we can imagine this, all of this oneness that is expressing as human beings, as everything that is being expressed is not really a separate thing. It's part of the whole. It's part of a fabric appearing a certain way, just manifesting into form. The energy coalesces into form a certain way, but it's never separate. The idea of separation comes from the human mind just creating an idea of me and other. It's just entangled in senses and bodily instinct for survival, biological instinct for survival. But there's nothing separate really. There's just intelligence being interpreted in a human mind or brain, and yet it's really the intelligence of the whole that is being expressed, being experienced. And with spiritual seeking, a lot of people go through their spiritual seeking, and the mind, or the ego mind, which is just an illusion of thought, the ego mind, finds that it needs to get rid of certain characteristics of this person, or become a better version of this person, a happier, more generous, kind person. But all of that's just an illusion. All of that's just thoughts. Those things happen when there is recognition of the unseparated nature of this anyway. But the forced needing to be better, which is often the motivating force of the ego, doesn't lead to peace and happiness, and actually is another story playing out. So ultimately there's no relaxation. The relaxation, the openness isn't there really. It's another contrived story trying to fit into the narrative that's already been established in the mind. And the main thing about seeking is, who is seeking what? Usually it's, I am seeking to find myself. That's sort of the premise or the idea behind a lot of seeking. I need to find who I am. I'm trying to work out who I am. And if I work out who I am, everything will be okay once I sort that out, fix it, make it the best version of myself. And all of that is just story. Whatever is playing out in whatever capacity is an expression of this wholeness. There are various ways we can look at this separate self that we've assumed and become. But even if you just look back at the complexity of how everything is being expressed and unfolded around, that complexity would suggest that the understanding of how this human being says the next word, reacts a certain way, the human being feels like it has free will. All of these things are fine. Nothing has to be gotten rid of or fixed or changed. This is an all-encompassing view that says whatever is happening this way. What's being expressed is too complex to comprehend. So the main thing is, once there are sort of, let's just say in a story, there are degrees of awakening, I suppose. It seems like the idea, the conditioning seems to diminish or fade over time, to a point where it doesn't feel like that ever was. Just feels like there was a story, like a dream that was happening, and it's no longer happening that way. And it never was real. But in this looping thought, the mind, it just took that to be real, and it ran with that, and lots of different interactions and reactions followed through, or were entangled in that supposed identity, which was never there. That's the funny thing. It was never never actually was. But so there seems to be levels of awakening. Let's just for a story, for the mind to grasp onto, because we're communicating, so that's what we do as human beings. This can't really be described, because whatever is being birthed in words is always just a limited version of an interpretation through a human mind. But as far as investigating it to loosen up that contraction, that's probably where some value lies. Let's just say there was varying sort of happenings in awakening. It's not really happenings, because it's all the same thing expressing different ways. But in the story, if we look at it in a human story, in a mind constructed linear cause and effect way, which is once again just a story, but anyway, there seemed to be great suffering. So there was oblivious, there was running. Firstly, there was just running on life, doing, active, achieving, competing, and finding success in some material things. And then there was family, and then there was so there was comfort and security and money and all the things that one would think are necessary. And then, for whatever reason, there was still discontent. There was an underlying unhappiness, a suffering that couldn't sustain itself. It couldn't stay that way. So the tension of life, in whatever way, just caused expression, and then there's interaction with people around, and then there's marital destruction, and all of these things can happen. And it's not really there's nobody doing any of this. It's nobody's fault. You can't pinpoint every circumstance that led to every circumstance right back to the Big Bang. It's too complex to comprehend. So human beings express and react and do what they do for whatever reason. That's just what happens. There's so much time and energy spent on trying to improve that person, that character, make a better version of that character. And in the functional sense of the world, if it means that individual navigates in this story better with other people, that's okay. It's all okay, because it's all just life doing this anyway. So life is like an ever-changing chameleon of adapting, like a shape-shifting expression. So it's always adapting intelligently to whatever it has to work with. So when things happen in life, as I said here, there was material success, there was comfort, there was, the house, the family, and all these things. And then, even though there was a deep-seated discomfort or suffering, I think, it was unseen, it was unknown, and it was suppressed because of all the stimulus on the top. All the, the doing, all of the achieving, all of the feeling worthy because I've made it to a certain level. Those things happened. Those things were happening. And then there was just the rug was pulled, and destruction of all that I, as John, held dear. And, they're gifts now, but you wouldn't wish for them at the time. If I had the choice as John, I wouldn't choose it. But those circumstances, the challenges in life, leads to change, and it can contract further, or depending on the human being and the circumstances, it can start to open and work through itself and understand and sort of look at a deeper picture, which is what started to happen here. And I guess that's the time when there was a deeper investigation. There was lots of meditation, and creating quiet space for this to just look into itself. And then there was a change whereby that seemed to help for a while. And then there was awakenings where, there were various awakenings, and the awakenings feel like an achievement at first. feel like you're getting somewhere. Oh, good. This is working. Now I get it. I understand. This is working. This is good. I'm feeling much more peaceful. That happened. Well, it happened here in the early stages, in the first couple of awakenings, and then there was a much greater impulse, I suppose, to seek the ultimate truth of everything. And it's kind of like Santa Claus has been seen to not be Santa Claus, but you want to understand how that came about. You want to understand where that appearance was born in the mind. So there's an investigation. There was an investigation, a seeking to understand your true nature. Okay, if that's not true, then what is this? How does this work? How did this come about? And how does this become abiding peace, liberation, freedom? And so there was just more effort and discipline and seeking put into that, probably in the middle ground, more so than ever, because there was light, there was an achievable goal, or there was, I was watching enough information and reading enough information. I've read so many books, went to retreats and courses and all sorts of stuff. And everybody has a different take on it. There's so many different angles on it. It's quite confusing, actually, because the ego mind, which is still not quite cleared, it's pretty slippery. It wants to grab onto anything it can to form a new identity and strengthen itself and get back to some form of security, which it had when it was, completely self-identified. And that middle ground is a lot of seeking. And then there was just a stopping of all of that when it was seen that this was all one thing. This was all, it's not even a thing, but this was complete. Doesn't need to get anywhere. It's already complete. It's just expressing in this creative multitude of forms and beauty. And that sort of, I guess, second major awakening, I suppose I would call it in a story, changed everything. It was like, oh, there's nothing to seek. There's no one there to do the seeking. It's all an appearance. It's all energetic blossoming. It's all appearing and changing, and there's no real time. It's just a shifting, changing, eternal now. Energetic expression in all manner of forms, interacting, the complexity of which is impossible to comprehend, especially with the human mind. And yeah, that became what it was. And after that, there was still conditioning. So things still come up, conditioning still plays, but now whatever happens is okay. And there is impulse in this intelligence to self-correct, to find, to learn and adapt. It still happens. It's happening exactly the same as it always did. It's just that the identity that is supposedly running this isn't there. So it's much more fluid. Life is much more creative. Life is much more open. Yet the conditioning fires up, but more like a hollow story or echo or projection, and becomes less and less, because it's just, I guess it's rehabitualized in the brain, reconditioned in the brain. So it's always reminding itself that conditioning is an old program running, an old story. It's not real. It knows it's not real. And this intelligence knows it's not real. But now it's almost amused by it. It's almost, it's like it's the characteristics that I would have said before as John were less than ideal. I should be more spiritual or better or perfect or whatever. Now those ideas that pop up, it's a strange thing to say, but they're sort of loved. It's like watching a pet or a loved one with a characteristic that is quite a little bit not quite right. It's a bit off, bit eccentric or it's a bit strange, not hurting anyone really. And yet, even though these things do hurt and cause suffering when they're believed in, it's now they don't, because they just fire up and they're so transient it doesn't matter. But there's almost a recognition of this recognition we could call unconditional love, which is okay. It's just okay. Everything's okay. You know, we would say this is wrong or right, or this is harming others and this isn't, and you know, those, we have moral guidelines in society. And they're useful, and they're useful as a guide rail, you know, some barriers or some helpful guidance for humanity that's a bit lost, a little bit self-identified, in turmoil, suffering. And those guide rails probably help society function and not cause the others, supposed others, but the rest of the energetic expressions of humanity around them, it causes less harm when there's some moral guidelines that are keeping people from, you know, harming others and inconveniencing others too much. But ultimately, if this is seen that this is all the same and the other is not another, it's the same, it's just another expression of the same, there doesn't need to be like moral rules, because this just sees itself. It's the same. It doesn't have an impulse to harm itself. It doesn't seem like nature, life, this wholeness has any particular malevolence to it. It's the opposite. It feels, you know, benevolent. It feels like it's loving, a loving energy experiencing itself, and in a way, in a story, trying to harmonize itself after expression and contrast and polarity happens. And then there seems to be a balancing of that back into harmony. So, and you know, it's beautiful, mathematical, you know, it's patterns, and it seems intelligence. There's an intelligence underlying all of this. The fabric of this is this expression in matter and reality that is expressed, which is just one form of this, because it's really infinite possibility that hasn't collapsed yet into this reality. Those infinite possibilities, the probability wave of possibility is always there in the back, you know, behind what we even perceive as reality. So it's too complex to understand, but just keeping an open mind, what is appearing is only one manifestation. I don't know about dimensions and alternate realities and universes and all of this, but it's probably possible. If it can be imagined, it's probably possible in some way. It's already appearing in imagination anyway, in story, in thought, which is an energy, a creative expression of this. It seems like now, whatever happens, there will be conditioning reacting to that, but even that is seen as just another expression in this. So nothing's wrong. The suffering is not perpetuated. There might be a slight contraction sometimes to things from old habit patterns. There might be contraction in the body that does this. The human being might not like it this way. That's okay. You know, it doesn't need to be understood even why it doesn't like it this way. It's just seen as part of the whole, expressing in whatever way it does. I would say it couldn't have happened any other way, because it's happening this way right now. If it could have happened any other way, it would be happening that way. And yet, even in that expression, it will self-learn, adapt, interact, and keep changing. So it won't stay that way. It'll probably evolve towards harmony or interactivity with something else in the universe. So the greatest freedom is not to be free of a separate self feeling, but just to be free that anything can appear and happen, including a separate self appearing, including the feeling of being a separate self, with a broader view of kind of intuitively being openness. And this is appearing in that. So what I am is not a human being as such. It includes a human being, but it's It's everything. It's this. It's whatever's appearing, and it's not even it's not even real apart from the mental processes that make it into conceptualized stories, objects, labels. So this is just an enjoyment now of whatever's happening. And, you know, I think discomfort can still happen, but it doesn't have any depth or juice to it. It's just another appearance that is transient, and it's known as such. And there seems to be always this fullness of wholeness, this full it's hard to describe this. It's like there's an energetic fullness which is complete and unruffled always, and all of this is happening as well in that completeness. That's what's talking through this body, through this intellect, through this brain. That's what's talking. That completeness is just expressing. So all of these things can happen, all of these less than ideal things, but it's okay. In the story and the short-term functioning and the amendment and the change of those, that'll happen. That's okay. You know, it should be better. The thoughts come. That's okay. Everything's okay, really. The thing is, just look at what you really are. Because once it's looked for and not found, there's an opening. There's just a spaciousness that's full energetic expression, including this word, including everything that's happening. So whatever appears is the same thing. And it's not a thing, but it's the same oneness, fullness, you know, infinitely complex energy expressing this way and changing, constantly changing. So this embraces all occurrences. Nothing's wrong. You know, and when you see different people in different religions, and you know, the idea of this is the right way or the wrong way, or you know, they're off on a tangent, you know, making up new stories, and they shouldn't do that. That's just all gone. I just see religion or beliefs or spiritual pursuits or whatever way a human being is navigating this with whatever tools it's grabbed onto and conceptualized is absolutely perfect, fine. Can't be unperfect, can't be imperfect, because it's all this intelligent energy playing that way. So it's just different. It's just different points of views. They're just not, and they're all creative. They're all amazing. Even these words, there's concepts happening here. It's not like this. This is just more stories. It's not like this at all. It's much more open than this. It can't be contracted like this. This is just one viewpoint in one human body expressing opinions or ideas or concepts. That's what they all are. Every single word is a separation, is a solidification into an object that isn't there. They're just interpretations of this energy playing. So, you know, you go, well, I'm just getting confused. What's the point of that? The point is just, this can just decontract and relax the thinking it's knowing. And once there's an openness, once there's more open flow of this humanity, this human being navigating or being in this world, living this way, that openness is more peaceful. It's free, it's open, free, because it's not contracted into a separate self form all the time, which just creates a perpetuation of suffering, contracted suffering. You know, am I good enough? Can I do it? Did they do it well enough? I did it really well and I got this, and just all these stories they're just not seen past. They're all a limitation. They're all so objectified, and there is no object. The object is all the same, appearing as object. So it's happening this way, but it doesn't matter. And yet, everything matters. It sounds, everything is supremely important because this beautiful, vibrant life is doing this. So it all matters, and it's all interacting, and it's all having an effect, and it's fantastic and creative and beautiful and rich. And this is not saying be nothing. This is saying be everything. Be everything. Love everything. Embrace everything. Enjoy and interact with everything as everything. And understand this viewpoint is there, participating, doing this. What a miracle, what an amazing thing for this. That's what I remember thinking walking across this field one night, and there was just awe that was like eye-watering awe at the miracle that this could do this. The miracle that this intelligence could interact through this that it's created of itself. That was the miracle. That was the most awe-inspiring moment when it was like the realization. It was just like, how didn't I see this, as John, but that was still hanging around. How could I not have seen this? But that's the miracle, is that it can do this. The miracle is this can do this, can witness itself through this, created this in itself, and is interacting with itself, witnessing itself, watching itself in visual form or whatever, sound, sight, touch, all senses. But at that time it was mainly visual. There was just a seeing, and it was it was just beyond needing to comprehend, but just an amazing, amazing mystery that was being witnessed. The real liberation or freedom is not having to do this any particular way, in any way better. And as that everything can express the way it is, all contraction and judgment and suffering, because there's no real belief in any separate self anymore. There's conditioning, there's remnants of conditioning which are just like echoes of stories, but they're never believed. Once it's seen, it can't be unseen in this body. There's a decontraction of the mind somehow that allows openness. And there was a particular moment I could see that happening in a way. There was a particular change that happened in the contraction of the mind, and it never knew that it could do that. That's the thing. The mystery was that the brain or the mind or whatever, it never knew that it could open. It always just thought this is the reflex contraction that's always there. But there was a moment where that just didn't want to let go, and then sensations and all sorts of energy were happening, and then it's like, okay, I'm going anyway. And then things opened, and it was like the brain, the mind, whatever this human interaction is, learnt complete new perspective, a fresh perspective that it never knew was possible. Because from a child, you've been taught to stay contracted, do this, you are that. You've been indoctrinated to remain separated. That's the story that the brain it becomes habituated. That becomes the reflex instinct. That is the normal way to be, and it doesn't really know any different until all experiences in life can prepare this organism, this mental capacity, this intellect to eventually shake itself out of that contraction. However it happens, I reckon it would be completely independent for every single human being that goes through this. But there can be similarities, or there can be explanations that at least maybe allow whoever's listening to this to know that this is possible. It is possible. It's there. It's what we are already. It's always been this way. It will always be this way. And there are a lot of people who have a contracted sense of self. And that's just that, doing that. Even that's not wrong. There's just different viewpoints, different perspectives. And if I look back at the story of John, the viewpoint of being contracted and never, and being sort of unknowingly not awake in that sense, was very, very difficult. There was no way out. There was always suffering, churning, subtle, below the surface sometimes, and sometimes gross discomfort. And the feeling now is an openness that's totally different. And much more grateful, appreciative. But it's not a better version of being a better person. It's just happening naturally. There's no effort. There's no effort. When there's effort, in fact, to do anything, it's observed, it's seen as who's doing that effort. Effort still happens. It's just not really anyone doing it. So I think things happen a bit easier now and more gets done. And then there are times when the conditioning interferes and nothing gets done, or there's a conflicted way of doing things. But then that teaches new conditioning. The funny thing, and this is all spilling over into sleep as well, it feels like the human brain gets conditioned to do things habitually a certain way, and then that becomes like the background program, the default that's running. And now in dreams, that identity is also known to not be true. So the identification in dreams is also dropped or dissolved or changed, whereby a dream can happen and it's not even like being an observer in the dream. It's just like being the wholeness of the dream, and there's entertainment happening. So it's like this vibrant, energetic human biology processing unit is always interacting, and it interacts and has experience in life, sort of experience, you know, it seems to sense and has some sort of experience in life as this human being. There's just no body there having the experience, because that idea of being a self was also an experience. It was also a mental process, a thought process, an object created in thought. And that's just seen as not there. It never was there. It was always a story or a dream. And that brings us to another thing, you know, the idea of dreaming in awakened state. Most of our senses are not what we perceive them to. They're not what is being perceived in our senses as biology is basically a snapshot that's summarized. You know, we look in, I don't know whether, I can't remember the exact details, but there's like a sphere of focus when we look around a room, and the mind fills in everything else. And the eye blends and flicks and gets an idea, and it's already got a snapshot and a memory of what that sort of was before. The mind is constantly summarizing, sort of interpreting, summarizing, and just making a best guess at things. And it's to keep us safe and alive, which is fine. But it's not really what's going on. And that's in daytime. So in the daytime, the mind is dreaming up a story from little bits of information that is, you know, piecing together from previous experiences, and just a limited version of what's going on, so that it can conserve energy and basically respond or react in the most efficient manner. So the mind in the daytime is actually dreaming the whole time. It's dreaming up a story. It's dreaming up an interpretation of what's there. It's not there. It's not what's there at all. It's dreaming up a version of it. And there seems to be similarities in human beings. We see red similar ways. We don't know whether they're exactly the same way in two different people, but we see red, and you know, that person sees red as well, and it's the same color as, say, blood. So, you know, there is a commonality to the way these senses seem to react in a human body. And then there's a communication that sort of blends that understanding. But ultimately, it's all dreaming from sense perception, making up stories and interpretations, filling in the missing bits, filling in most of it actually. And that's with physical senses. And in our sleep phase, when human beings are asleep and they're dreaming, the mind is doing the same thing. It's making up stories and images, and then we are interacting with them, almost as if they're the same thing. We'll interact with a dream. There can be pulse rate and high blood pressure and heartbeat and the breathing, all of these things, heat. It can be perspiring in a dream. All of these things will happen when the body perceives that as being real. So it's reacting to a dream. And in the daytime, it is also reacting to a type of dream, a constructed reality that comes through the mind. So we're actually always dreaming. And then what I'm talking about here is once this becomes awareness sort of opens, there's an awakening and awareness opens, I suppose, if we're putting it into a story, that then has a different perspective on everything. The waking state, and that habituates into the mind and the way it normally reacts without sort of falling straight back into the contraction of being a separate self. That default story is no longer believed, and that spills into sleep state. So the same, I guess, witnessing presence, it's not a witness, but it's like the same open awareness of what's going on becomes integrated into the conditioning of the human mind. And in sleep state, the same thing is happening, which is this openness. This liberation is happening in sleep.